welcome to Zion's Banner. This is a little different time. I like the internet speed I'm getting though. So I would keep the same days, but we'll have to see how things go. This is kind of a rebroadcast. I'm doing this live, so this will get me more used to just kind of going live and seeing how that goes. What I don't know is whether people get really good notifications or not. So we're going to find that out kind of this evening and see how the time works. But the neighbors aren't home, so it's exciting. I don't have all the kids on the internet, and so that should go ahead and allow us a little better. I like the time things because you guys know where to tune in, and I can even give you the URL now through Patreon and even through Tuber Tools. I didn't put up an official plug. I've started to use Tuber Tools a little to make things better. I'm limited because I'm under the free license, but we're going to keep working on it. We're going to be in the Beatitudes tonight. We're going to try to redo the broadcast that did not work out so well. And so I'm just pulling this up a little bit here, and we're going to go to our PowerPoint tonight. Now, if you're following along, it's not all that complicated. We're at the beginning of Matthew chapter 5. The schedule is going to get a little weird. I will be out speaking, so I'll just do a quick shout out to Peru, Grace Brethren Church, which is going to have me come and share the ministry we have here. And so I'm kind of excited about that. And so I will be doing that. I also am going to visit my dad, who's 80 something, and I found out that my stepmom is really close to death. And so it might be good to visit him. I am excited. Some people are coming into the room. I can see them even in this strange format here. So you guys who are part of the community here, you can be praying. Maybe I'll even throw something up. But I may be visiting my dad right after the loss of his wife. So I don't know how that's all going to go. We don't get to pick our time. So let me shift us into PowerPoint mode. Ta-da! It'll take a second or two to come up. I'm going to pull that down here, and I'm going to watch with you guys. Hey, shout out to Dinu. Excellent. Now what I have to do is not get this too large and in charge. So there we go. And the PowerPoint should come up any second, and we should be able to go ahead and do that. I'll just put a quick thanks. There you go. The nice thing is, a little secret, there's a guy that my daughter's getting, kind of likes. He's at Peru. He's sort of a associate pastor, and she's going to fly out with us. So I get my daughter with me on a trip. That almost never happens when I'm doing a speaking trip, as well as my wife. So I am super excited about that. Okay, we actually skipped a beatitude. And you probably said, why did we do that? Well, you're going to see tonight that actually there's something kind of neat that goes on with the Beatitudes that makes the Beatitude we're looking at really go ahead and link back to the Beatitude, blessed are the poor in spirit, in verse 3. So this really kind of works pretty well. When I'm teaching, I tend not to put things in questions as much. I put the questions front-loaded in the teaching, and when I'm doing apologetic stuff, I want to really examine people's assumptions. So the title of this might be a little less edgy. It worked really great at a Messianic congregation, but we're going to look at what Jesus says about genuine strength and how it's different from what the world says. So the first thing I want to do is tie it back to Matthew. Remember, we're into the big story, and I love tying things back into the ultimate purpose of the book. And so let's go back to the purpose of Matthew. Let me pull some scholarly opinion. Um, and I'm going from Richard T. France. Now, the new Bible commentary is very good. It was edited by D.A. Carson. But the particular section on Matthew was done by Richard T. France. The reference is up there. So, again, if you're looking to expand your library, it also is available on Logos Bible software. So you can pull that in. I love having Logos because my laptop has about 300 different resources, and I can work in the airport where I find myself a lot. So I just pull up Logos and I can really kind of do stuff. And so that's always great. Um, the purpose is he, being Matthew, the Jewish tax collector guy, had to think out theologically, and Matthew's gospel, more clearly than the others, presents the view of Jesus as himself the true Israel. So Jesus presents himself as the true Israel. Matthew presents Jesus as the true Israel, and those who have responded to his mission as the true remnant of the people of God, in whom his eternal purpose is continued. Now, I would say that a different way. I've always said that this is about who the true community is, who the community that inherits the promises are. And when I did this last time, I pointed out a book that I haven't read yet. I really need to put money aside for reading, but things are really tight. Called The Survivors of Israel by Eliot. And so the big discussion about Matthew's time was which community receives the promises. And so he's writing this in terms of that. And so really, this is really cool because the image of the vine and the branches in John and a lot of this stuff goes back to, are you part of the community that inherits the promises? That's going to tie into the way Matthew presents this. So Matthew gets all of Jesus's teaching together, and I like to call this the Torah of Messiah, because to me it's the heart of Jesus's teaching. And so I believe there's a Torah of Messiah. How would I find it? Well, I look at the apostles and I look at Jesus' teaching, and that's the Torah of Messiah. Now, let's do a take-home. Originally, this was a sermon, and so you get a kind of a take-home truth, which in apologetics, the take-home truth is the other position has real problems. But in teaching, what's the take-home truth here? Only the one with true strength may rule. We're going to talk about the connection here too, between the ruling and the non and the true community. So if you got have your Bible and you're not out doing the lawn, or you have that trusty cell phone with your Bible and you are doing the lawn, you can go ahead and turn to Matthew 5:5. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. There are going to be two important parts to this. Blessed, by the way, is the good life. A great way to do this would be to talk about what is the good life. And then what is the result of being meek? Well, the meek are blessed for a reason. So we're going to look at this. The meek are blessed because they'll inherit the earth. There really is a promise here. Remember that in Matthew's day, the Jew is not looking for a ephemeral or a mystical kingdom apart from the physical earth. So for the Jewish audience that Matthew's writing to, this is always tied to a real live physical reality. God is going to undo the fall. He's going to reunite heaven and earth. Things are going to be restored. And so the meek are the ones that inherit the earth. That is characteristic of the inheritors. Now, I went to Revelation because John's operating off the same thing. Now, his purposes are a little different. He's writing around 90 AD. And so now he's writing post-temple. Matthew's writing pre-temple destruction. Come on back tomorrow, because we've got an interesting topic apologetically And the parting of the ways is going to be mentioned in relation to it. Let's go to Revelation 5, 9, and 10. And they sang a new song saying, "You are worthy, you being the Lamb, which is Jesus, are worthy to take the scroll and open its seals, for you were slain, and you have redeemed us to God by your blood out of every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. You have made us priests and you've made us kings and priests to our God, and we shall reign upon the earth." Do you see the tie-in between this beatitude? Blessed are the meek. Here's the characteristic of the kingdom citizen, of the disciple. This is what they look like. Blessed are the meek. Why? For they will inherit the earth. We, the followers of Messiah, the redeemed of the Lord, will indeed reign on the earth. I don't restrict that to, there are promises to a redeemed Israel, but let's just put it right out there, okay? This is at the beginning of Revelation. And so we actually will have jobs in the millennial kingdom. I'm excited about that. Uh, and so we really will have jobs. This is not a eat cheesecake with flying dogs sort of existence. Randy Elkhorn wrote a book called Heaven. There were some things that were a little bit of a, I say maybe. But he really pointed out something important. We need to look at heaven as a real place with real responsibilities that we'll have and real jobs suited to our giftings and temperament that we will be able to do for the glory of God and worship in the process. So worship will not be just a passive thing, but it will actually entail vocation of some kind. That's the old word for jobs. It actually comes from the word calling. And so that's where that is at. The meek will inherit the earth. That is characteristic of the disciple. And we see the same sort of promise in Revelation. Okay? That's a key point. The followers of the new community will inherit the promise and rule on earth with Messiah. Do you have something to look forward to? Yes, you're going to be a ruler because you're going to be the type of person that Messiah can indeed entrust. By the way, that's the way to look at ministry, whether, however many hours you punch in the clock, okay? Whatever task you're doing, you're actually being entrusted with it by God. And so, blessed are the meek. Okay, someone's done some reading. Great. Take home truth, though, is a little different. Someone coined a new term, and I love the term. I've got to save that term. Uh, the take home truth is true strength is found in self control and restraint, not in force. I absolutely like that. You know, that is a key distinction. And I keep going back to it, and I'll probably touch on it again. Um, but really, Islam is the religion of Allah being this forceful deity that just beats everybody over the head. Yes, people have to accept Jesus, but we're going to talk about this really in terms of some important things about the very nature of our God. Um, and I think this is a key difference. All the time I reach new atheists to try to portray God as some sort of ogre. And really, what he asks of us is what he himself displays. True strength is found in self control and restraint, not in force. But this is the exact opposite of the world. Uh, I remember a famous coach who said, "Winning isn't the main thing, it's the only thing." Everybody loves a winner. Um, in fact, I am deeply concerned. Read an article today. I am deeply concerned about the state of Christianity in the West because I think there is the real danger of a celebrity Christianity. Um, and I'm not saying there aren't great ministers out there. I'm saying that the minister is the servant and he is never greater than the message he shares. And so that's so important. And we really have created a sort of personality Christianity. So, like good teachers, please, like good teachers, um, but realize that your teachers are simply individuals gifted to do a particular task in the kingdom, just as you have been particularly gifted, and God has invested in their education and training so that they can do that to a greater degree. Now we have the Greek word there. Boy, that is a really interesting Greek word, right? Parus. I'm looking at the marking there and checking my breathing markings. Gentle, meek, or mild. Blessed are. Now that's the original language. Now, why is this so cool that I saved this beatitude and jumped it earlier? Because we went from uh, blessed are the poor in spirit to and we did blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And it looks like um, you know, we kind of skipped something, and we sort of did, but you know what's really neat about this is the use of the Septuagint. um there is a word play, and I got to get you used to this because this happens all the time in the Hebrew scriptures. Okay, there are these puns and these word plays, and it's a device that was used in order to learn scripture and retain it. And so, one of the famous ones to me that is so absolutely hysterical is John the Baptist says, I could make sons out of these rocks. And there's a word play. Ben is son, and Eben is rock. And there's a word play. And there's a lot of this alliteration and wordplay that goes on in Hebrew. One, to help remember the truth behind it. And two, it's just something that was done. And so what you're seeing up there is if you find the Greek word for gentle and you trace it back through the Septuagint to the Hebrew, and you say, which Hebrew word was translated by that Greek word when the Bible was translated into Greek, you find this word, anai. And so what's interesting about that word is that it's related to ana, okay, which is the word for poor. And there's a direct relationship that seems to exist between these words. And so the Hebrew word in this beatitude, blessed are the meek, is related to the Hebrew word for the word poor that appeared in the first beatitude. Now, I look at Hebrew words, they have kind of a main central idea, but the way that idea is expressed changes a little bit. And so sometimes you look at the Hebrew word and you're scratching your head and you're saying, well, wait a minute, the meaning of anah, doesn't seem to, I mean, it seems to fit with poor, but it doesn't seem to fit as well with force. Well, that main idea of submission and subjection are both contained. By the way, do you know the difference between submission and subjection? Because in both cases, the will is being brought under another. The difference is volition. Volition changes subjection to submission. So if I voluntarily place myself under another person, that's submission. If I'm forced to do so, then that's subjection. Those that don't submit to Jesus will be subjected to Jesus. That's not because Jesus is mean. That's because he has the right to rule. And because he has both the moral and the ontological right to rule, those that don't submit to him voluntarily will still be under his authority. Actually, the devil does not rule hell. Okay? That's kind of a myth. That's what you'd call mind fiction, to borrow from somebody in the room. I like that term, mind fiction. And so these two words are related. Now let's talk about this chart. Take this chart and please use it. Person, God, precept, gentleness, and then principle or command. And you can do this with anything. We need to have a theocentric ethic or a theocentric moral basis. So when you see that come up here, what I'm doing is I'm just trying to demonstrate that for you. Here's the way you can use that. How do I determine if an action's right or wrong? Well, one, if the word directly commands that I don't do it, that's like patently obvious, right? But what about some areas where the word doesn't directly command, but I'm trying to discern if there's a principle? Good is always connected to God's character. God is the ultimate good. God has good within himself, and then he created things which reflect that goodness. So virtue exists first in God and then is reflected in man. Man is to be an image bearer. Think of it like this. God is the sun and we're like the moon. We reflect the sun's light. And so that's the way it's supposed to work. So let's say you are a parent like I've raised 5 kids, and your kid comes to you and says, "Why do I need to clean my room?" It's going to be hard for you to point to a verse that says, "Thou shalt clean your room." Now you could go to the verse where obey your mother and father. That goes to "I told you so." It's nice, but it didn't really answer their question. And when they become 17 or 18 and they move out of your house, they don't have a moral reason necessarily to be under your authority. Let's try something different. You and I worship a God of order, and your room says something about your God. So if your room is disorderly, you're sending a message about God that is not true. You could do this with honesty. Why do you need to be honest? I serve a God of truth. Therefore, it is incumbent upon me to reflect him by being truthful. And really, that helps us with the essence of ethics, because I can trace moral good to God's moral attributes. By the way, that also tells us something if we don't have God. See, here's the bottom line. Why do you need to be truthful? I don't know. Survival of the fittest. No, that doesn't give me a reason to be truthful. I may survive better if I lie. So that doesn't work. That doesn't create a transcendent ethic for truthfulness because it's a social construct. Actually, I have friends that have worked among tribes, and there was one tribe that believed treachery was actually a good thing because it helped the tribe survive. So let's see if we can bring this home. Is gentleness demonstrated in Messiah? Now, someone already chimed in, but let's give ourselves a biblical basis for this sort of idea. Behold, my servant in whom I uphold, my elect one, in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. Think back to the baptism of Jesus. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the Gentiles. He will not cry out nor raise his voice, nor cause his voice to be heard in the streets. A bruised reed, now catch this, a bruised reed he will not break, and a smoking flax he will not quench. Okay, those are statements of gentleness. He will not crush the bruised plant, and he will not put the flax out that is barely lit. He will bring forth justice for truth. He will not fail or be discouraged. It's kind of a good verse to think about when we're discouraged. Maybe we can turn that over to him. Till he established justice in the earth, and the coastlands wait for his law. By the way, that's interesting. Is there a Torah of Messiah? I have a basis for a Torah of Messiah. His law. Interestingly enough, Matthew's going to quote this. But when Jesus knew it, he withdrew from there, and the great multitudes followed him, and he healed them all, yet warned them not to make him known. We're at Matthew chapter 12. We start getting into what's called the Messianic secret. We'll get there a little later. All that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. Behold my servant in whom I've chosen, my beloved in whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him. He will declare justice to the Gentiles. He will not quarrel or cry out, neither will anyone hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, or a smoking flax he will not quench, till he sends forth justice to victory. Now, Rabbi Singer would go, oi, oi, this isn't being quoted right, oi. No, Matthew is taking these verses and he's basically saying, look, there are verses that point to Messiah not using mere force in order to bring about his kingdom and fulfill God's purposes. And so he asked them not to make him known. He didn't want to force the issue at this time. The people were not ready. There's stuff going on here. And so Matthew is not misquoting the word. He is using the word to illustrate or highlight something, an event that illustrates something about Messiah that this verse points to. Okay, so he's using this verse to point to a quality of Messiah that this event also displays. This is not an illegitimate use of the word. But now you see how it works. What about God? Now, I really like this. I had a Muslim guy who posted, I didn't get to him quick enough, that God couldn't be a servant. We might deal with that at some point. And so Jesus can't be God because it says my servant. And since God can't be a servant, and Jesus is a servant, Jesus is not God. Okay? We will get to it. And you asked a question about what's called the Messianic secret. And it has to do with the timing of things. And the preparation of the people and where things are in the plan. Because there's going to be an official presentation that has to occur on a specific day, by the way, predicted according to Daniel. There's also a thing with the leadership's rejection and the way Jesus re-strategizes his ministry in order to accomplish God's purposes, given the opposition of the leadership of Israel. So your question will get answered. It'll get answered in the flow of the text, but there's some really cool reasons why Jesus retools his ministry and begins to pull and do things a different way. And so, yes, they're being commanded to do something they might not think makes sense. And there are a lot of reasons why you would, if you thought he was the Messiah, want to tell people. But there's a strategy involved. And as we're building towards this thing, you're going to see the rejection of the leaders. And then Jesus does something with their rejection. And then there's a timing with his formal presentation. So we will indeed get there. Here's the thing. Is God gentle? Now, we just finished dealing with the golden calf in Sunday school, and there's these verses that are really hard to reconcile with the gentleness of God. And there's a book that I really want to read through that deals with the wrath of God as an expression of his love. And I really want to read the book because I think he's going to say some things pretty neat that Peckingham also said that I think are really worthwhile. My daughter the other day, who gets really theologically profound, and we have these interesting conversations, said that justice is all about compassion. And so I'm anxious to read that book. It's going to be released in November, and I don't know if I'll have the funds, but we shall see. Comfort, yes, comfort my people, says the Lord. Speak comfort to Jerusalem and cry out to her, for her warfare has ended. For her iniquity is pardoned. She has received double from the Lord. She has received from the Lord's hand double for her sins. So God is pleading that people cry out and that Jerusalem gets comforted. There is a gentleness to God. that can be found in the Old Testament. There is a restraint of his rightful wrath that is there for a reason, because he is a gentle God. This is distinctly different. Um, Judaism has this built in, but the rabbis and what they've done does not give much room for God's mercy or gentleness. Okay? Um, and so there's very little room for this to play in. Christianity gives full orb to this. I'm just getting a thing. So I'm going to type because I can actually do this while I'm with you. It's the pastor I'm speaking at. There we go. So it's kind of interesting with all the speaking going on and stuff. Things are a little different. There is a real gentleness to God. I'm going to read God telling us what he's like. This particular verse is repeated 5 times. It's what rabbis call the 13 attributes of God's mercy. I think it's a real important verse. If you want to understand God's moral attributes, his heart character, and Madeline Murray used to always portray the God of the Old Testament as a God of wrath. I'm going to go here just to debunk that and tell you what God says about himself. I actually have the verse memorized in Hebrew. I haven't reviewed it as much lately. But it should be right around 34:6. Here we go. Here we go. Yeah, the Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, Adonai, Adonai, El, Rahum, merciful, Vinahum, gracious, long-suffering, Erech Paim, Virav, or I should say Rav Vitov, Tov Ve'emet, abounding in goodness and truth. And so there's God's own self-description as being gracious, condescending. By the way, when someone says to me that Jesus can't be God because God is not a servant, the word chen means to stoop down or to condescend. And so God really exhibits or expresses meekness. Well, does that mean we can never be angry? Well, no, that doesn't. There is a difference between righteous and unrighteous anger. Now, how do I know it is allowable for us to be angry? Because Paul gives me directions about anger, and he wouldn't have to tell me about anger and give me directions if I was never allowed to be angry. Well, that's not true. I could sin. But in telling me to be angry but do not sin, he is both expecting me to be angry, and he is telling me or admonishing me by the Holy Spirit, do not sin, do not let the sun go down on your wrath. There is a distinction between righteous indignation and sinful anger. So let's look at an example of righteous indignation. By the way, did Jesus ever get mad? I get so mad when people tell me that Jesus is just always, always even keeled, never got mad, never experienced that emotion. He's just kind of always mellow, the pale Galilean sort of thing. Jesus went into the temple of God and drove out all those who bought and sold in the temple and overturned their tables. Wow. And the seats of those who sold doves, and said to them, it is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves. Is Jesus angry? Yeah, he's like tipping stuff over and throwing stuff around. So why isn't that wrong? Because of the difference between indignation, unrighteous indignation, and righteous anger. Well, what is the difference, you say? I'm so glad you asked. Righteous anger is always about God's honor and glory. See, what I should be upset about is when God gets dishonored, not getting my own way. Ooh, somebody asked a great question. And I'm trying to think of the difference between frustration and anger. I would say God doesn't get frustrated because for me, I experience frustration when my plans are thwarted. But ultimately, I think God knows that his plan won't be thwarted. So it's more like, can God take a long term view of things? Whereas I really don't know that my plans won't be permanently thwarted. Even my good plans. Let's say I have a good plan. I don't know that I could be stopped forever. I mean, I could not succeed. But God always in the end succeeds. Um, I think we do our best to frustrate him a lot of times. But I think because God has the long term view and has worked everything in to his providence, that I think he is less. I don't think he gets frustrated the way we get frustrated. Great question. I need to cease from anger that's unrighteous anger. Cease from anger and forsake wrath. Do not fret, it only causes harm. See, my anger creates trouble for me. God's anger does not create trouble for him because it stems out of his goodness, and my anger stems out of my fallenness. So that's where the problem kind of comes in. Unrighteous anger or rage is the opposite of gentleness. Now, I used to think that was only physical. Having been married for a while, I'm learning that I can really be really I can really use my tongue as a weapon or my tone. I don't always pay attention to that, but we can use our tone. And being angry makes us feel really strong. There's that surge of adrenaline, where you get the adrenaline rush, and it gives us a false feeling of power, but it really is the opposite of being strong because it's the opposite of gentleness. Someone's asking about the verse in Genesis 6:9. And someone jumped in, and I'm glad to see them here. Grieved in the heart, the Hebrew word grieved does not mean angry. Um, there's a word, erech apayim. Actually, the Hebrew word, it comes from the word for nose. I know this sounds weird, you know, like to say your nose. But when people get angry, their nose would flare. Okay, I mean we're talking Semitic people, like Italians, they really let it show on their face. Okay, um, and so the word for nose is because the nose would flare, the face would change. It was like a physical way to know when someone was mad. Um, and so long of nose literally means long suffering or patient, or long of continence. Okay. And so what I've discovered is that some of us internalize, especially if you're sort of like the introverted guy, kind of like me a little bit. I still get angry. Introverts get angry. It just goes somewhere else. So how do I deal with this? Ooh, wow. What do we do with this? Uh, you know, being kind of head guy, I'm not always in touch with the heart as well. Um, I really liked using a Christian meditation app before bed and stuff to kind of, I got to admit when I wrote poetry, some more of that stuff came out. But here's the thing, figure out what rights you feel are being trampled or what's being withheld from you. If I'm mad because something's being kept from me that I think I should have, or that some right of mine is being trampled on. See, and that offends my person, and then my offended person reacts. Now, in righteous anger, it's God that's being offended, and I'm concerned for his honor, his glory. And so that's kind of the distinction there. And so what you have to do is you sort of have to isolate what really what really riled me about that. You know, how did I really feel my toes stepped on? And I have to admit that it's hard in apologetics because there's a fine line. I get really bugged at false teaching, but I have to make sure it doesn't go to unrighteous anger. You know, it's really cool. Listening to Tovia has been good for me as I've dismantled these arguments. Um, Not in the sense that I couldn't figure out the answers, or I didn't know the answers, or I didn't know where to turn, or I didn't see things wrong in this argument, but forcing myself to listen to that. And okay, so Lord, I know this is off because of this and this reason. Help me put this together and present this in a good way. So you discern the root cause, you trace it back to the root right. What right, what's being withheld. You yield the right. Ooh, that's where it gets hard. Yielding the right. Okay, Lord, I may indeed have the right to be treated justly, but I'm going to give up that right to be treated justly and give it back to you. And I know you take good care of the things which are yours, and so I know you will take care of it. Ooh. Really hard to do because there's a part of us that doesn't want to. Wow. Someone's giving great questions. I'm going to take them because this is more informal. And I feel good. And I feel this is a good question. Can a atheist feel righteous anger? Only in the sense that he recognizes certain moral principles are indeed true and just. In other words, uh, could he feel righteous indignation when evil things are being done? Well, the image of God in him, knowing that the world shouldn't be that way, may produce anger. Let's just say it's really difficult for me to imagine that an atheist feels genuine righteous anger, but the image of God in him can still react. So it's possible on some small level, even though it's very twisted and disconnected, you know, the image of God in him could be responding, even though his worldview is inconsistent. By the way, dear sister raised an important point. When an atheist is angry over evil, he's inconsistent with his own worldview. Uh, Let me give you a fun story. I could do this, okay? Because a guy came to me with anger. I was witnessing in New York City, and this guy came up to me and said, "How can you believe in God, a God that would allow a 5-year-old girl to get killed, run over right in front of me? I was a child when I saw this horrible thing. I still had never recovered from it." And I said to him, "Well, let me ask you a few questions if I may." By the way, there's a great technique is to just ask the questions that puncture or show the inconsistency of the person's worldview. So I said to him, "Let me ask you a question. If you had a car and it was your car, could you do whatever you wanted with it?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm a New Yorker. I could do whatever I want with my car as long as it doesn't break, within reason, you know." And I said, "Well, if you have a house, can you do whatever you want in your house?" And he said, "Well, yeah. I mean, if I own the house here, I'm a New Yorker, and he's giving me kind of the Brooklyn thing here." And I said, "Well, here's the problem. Can't God do if God owns the universe? Can't he do whatever he wants with his universe?" And he just kind of, you know, In other words, I got him to really acquiesce to God's moral right to do what he wants with his universe, which undermined his position that God was doing something wrong. And see, that's using questions that's a great apologetics technique. Don't directly attack the premises, ask questions that undermine the premise. And so that's really kind of cool. Okay. Once you've realized that you're Christ's slave, boy, doesn't that rankle us? Okay. But it's a willing servitude. I'm a bond servant. Okay. It's not a subjection, it's a submission. Then you got to ask for God to kind of help you. Hey, if God can be patient, if God can be gentle, Lord, I need that gentleness. I need you to give me the gentleness of Jesus right now, because I really feel like putting my fist through a wall. And to me, that's the great exchange that we can do with the Holy Spirit. Lord, I'm angry. I want you to do the great exchange. I want you to impart Jesus' gentleness to me, and I will give you my anger right now. Impart Jesus' gentleness. Do that through your spirit. Okay? Well, I think this is about where we would have ended up if we had done this before. I like those likes, so that's great. I hope some people who weren't here will tune into this. And I figured out how I can do this kind of live. Um, I will keep you guys posted. I will be on the road, and I will try to do some broadcasts or set some broadcasts up while I'm on the road. I really want to do a live thing. So if I help Peru with their outreach, I want to set up a camera and do some like live streaming straight from Peru and like outreach. And what I really this is just my plan. Okay, it'll take God making it work. I want to set up a thing that says like uh, worldview examination, metaphysician uh, available, and then just kind of pull people in. So we'll see what God does, and I'll try to keep things going as much as I can. We may do a few premieres and maybe a few back things, but I will go ahead keep you posted. We'll probably be doing it live and on the fly. So thank you guys so much for coming in. The high speed was great, so we will keep the days, but what can we do with this high speed? This is just glorious. I'm going to say, it's getting to be, just about dinner time my way. So I don't know about you guys, but 6 o'clock gets to be that time. I'm going to say good evening. Look at that. I didn't say good night. I got to say good evening. By the way, for Hebrew buffs, you now can have some Hebrew. Erev Tov is good evening. Lila Tov is good night. So there you go.